welcome to everybody online, and I hope that you can hear me clearly. So I'll say a few words before I welcome the Deputy Secretary for Early Childhood who's going to speak with us. So again, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here with us this morning for the first of a series of early years forums conducted as part of the Centre's Early Start Bright Future program. And we love this logo, and it's pretty cool, and it really, in many ways, for us signifies hope when you look at those colours and you look at the beautiful words. It's exciting as a CEO of Victoria's peak body for children, families, carers and young people to open this forum today alongside with other colleagues, but really mostly alongside the Department of Education colleagues who are attending. We couldn't do this work without the generosity of not just resources, but actually the partnership and the shared learning in this space to ensure that the two sectors come together so that children get the benefit from early years education, but also all of the sorts of initiatives that are going on in this space. The Centre's Early Start Bright Future program has been running for 3 years now. We're not experts, but we're sort of getting there. And for us, it has been, and I wish Dr. Michelle Lonsdale was here today, but been a dream of ours to be working in this space. And as I said, we couldn't do this without the funding from the department. But together we're working hard to improve access to early learning opportunities for every child in this state. And there will be people online, people in the room who work in a vast range of child and family services who are better placed now than they were 3 years ago to make sure the children in the families that they are caring for get access to the high quality early learning services that we have in Victoria, which I still think are the best in the country. The Centre's Early Start Bright Future program, if you don't know much about it, aims to strengthen awareness amongst practitioners of the services and supports available to families experiencing vulnerability or hardship. With the department, we want to promote awareness about the impact of trauma on children's development and the critical importance of early years education in laying strong foundations for positive life outcomes. Just want to say, I've got 2 grandchildren. My kids used childcare, 25 years ago. It is really different. It is like revolutionary different now. And often you can not just see it through the eyes of the clients and the families you're working with, but your own children and grandchildren. And I think we'll talk about it a bit differently now in terms of our own life experience. Last year's release of the landmark Australian Childhood Maltreatment Study highlighted the national prevalence and long-term impacts of child maltreatment in Australia across all types of harm: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect and exposure, and impact of family violence. The study found that the child maltreatment is endemic in Australia. Around 40% of Australia's children have been exposed to domestic violence, followed by physical abuse, which is about 32%, emotional abuse around 31%, sexual abuse 28%, and neglect 9%. This is a remarkable study, and we launched it last year at the MCG with the researchers. And it really does give us a bit of a blueprint for where we need to work and intervene in terms of prevention, but also response. The study showed that most maltreated children experience 2 or more different types of maltreatment, and that child maltreatment is associated with dramatically increased odds of young people having a mental illness. One of the recommendations from the study is for key stakeholders to be supported to enable appropriate responses to child maltreatment. Now, the reason I mention this is because understanding the life course of the child and the family means we can provide the right response. So whether you're an early years worker or a family services worker or a child protection worker or a family violence worker or a foster care worker or a maternal child health nurse, this study is going to change the way we think. Today's forum, which is focused on one of these forms of maltreatment, which is actually often preeminent across for many, many thousands of children, represents an opportunity here from experts in the field. Evidence shows that children who experience family violence are less likely to experience a positive transition to school, They are more likely to be vulnerable across all 5 domains listed in the Australian Early Development Census, which assesses for physical health and wellbeing, social competence, emotional maturity, language and cognitive skills, particularly school-based, and communication skills and general knowledge. Not all children who experience family violence will have poorer health outcomes or disengagement from education, but our role as sector leaders and practitioners is to maximise the opportunities and outcomes for every single child, to make sure each child's emotional, physical, intellectual and social development is supported in the best way we can, whether we're working in child and family services or in early education or anywhere in the surrounding sectors. I'm speaking to the converted when I make these statements. While children are often invisible, and I have to say, we find that a bit. Don't know whether it's something that other people feel in the virtual room or here. We often have to talk about children when they're not talked about in particular forums, and particularly young children, particularly infants, particularly babies. And together, I think with our early childhood colleagues, I think we are on a mission to have much more presence of those little people in every room that we're in. The recommendations from the ACNS, or the Australian Child Maltreatment Study, points toward improving access to early education and targeted early intervention in the early childhood period as a really important focus. This is an area that centres committed to making a difference in. We want to see all practitioners and educators fully informed about the nature of maltreatment and trauma and how to respond and support families and children. And it is safe to say that there are different trajectories for children depending on the type of maltreatment. They often coexist, and often it's not clear about what to do, but we know what's going to happen in terms of some of the indicators of the study. We really hope that you enjoy the fantastic speakers we have lined up today. They all have expertise in the early years and the impacts of family violence on children. Today's session on the intersection between family violence and early years development is the beginning of a series. I know we've done other forums. I don't know why we're saying it's the beginning. It does not feel like the beginning for me, but the beginning of a series of webinars this year exploring how child and family services and early years educators can come together, share knowledge and expertise, and collaborate in advocating for children and supporting their families. Our partnership with the Department of Education enables the centre and our sector to support the important early years reform work of the department, which is gigantic. That's why Bronwyn looks tired this morning, because it's just so big. You know, for the Victorian government and the Victorian community, I'm not sure people really fully appreciate the size and scale of it. And particularly when I think about the capital component of this, it's really, really enormous. And we won't even get there. We won't really even go there today, but it's going to change the infrastructure that's in communities as well. And I think that's exciting when you think about community building. We have a shared goal to make sure every child in Victoria can be safe and supported in their earliest development to set them up for healthy and productive lives. And if my granddaughter is anything to go by, I can't believe the language development and the educational settings that have been created for really, really young children. It was not like that a few short years ago. It gives me great pleasure now, though, to invite Bronwyn Fitzgerald, Deputy Secretary for Early Childhood Education, to say a few words. She's been with the early years, in the early years group since 2015. So a really long time when you think, it doesn't sound like a long time, but that's been around, involved, helped drive the reforms that we have now. And I remember a time when we didn't have these reforms really. We had some really small scale work, not the big powerhouse that we have now. So Bronwyn and her team were really there at the start. Before that, worked at Premier and Cabinet doing social policy. She's got a couple of children who she says are great, 10 and 12. So welcome, Bronwyn, and really a newly minted Deputy Secretary, so that we're really proud to be working with. So can we give Bronwyn a round of applause to come speak
today? Hello, everyone online. Lovely to see you. This is such an important program and partnership for us, and it's really great to be able to be here to speak about it a little bit. I'd also like to acknowledge traditional owners of the country that we're on in the centre today, Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, pay my respects to their elders past and present, but I'd also like to pay respect to traditional owners of the different lands that everyone's beaming in from across Victoria today, and pay respect to their elders, past and present, and pay my respects also to all Aboriginal and First Nations people taking part today. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about child rights. I'm going to talk a little bit about our programs, and then at the end I'll talk a little bit about what this specific Early Start Right Future program offers for us and the potential that it brings for families' access to services, really pivotal services. But I'll start with the child rights side of things. I'll get my clicker working, hopefully. Did that work? If not, I might just, wave up the back and ask you to.
We're on it. They're on it.
They're on it. Okay. So whether we work in government or in a kindergarten or in, you can move to the next one now, even though I love that picture. And we've done that. Thank you. Right, this is the right one. Whether we work in government or in a kindergarten or a community-based child and family service, our work is underpinned by the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which was ratified 30 years ago by the Australian government's long-standing piece of fundamental direction and guidance for us. All children and young people are entitled to additional rights and specific protection under the Convention because of their vulnerability to exploitation and abuse. That example that Deb says about them not always being visible, that vulnerability of being young. Some of the rights that are contained in the Convention are the right to be treated fairly, the right to have a say about decisions that affect you, the right to live and grow up healthy, the right to be safe no matter where you are, the right to get an education, and the right to play and have fun. I include that last one because although it sounds kind of trivial, it sounds like something a bit fanciful, it's not. For children, play is how they learn in all of the domains of their development: physical, cognitive, social, emotional, literacy, numeracy, all of those domains of development, play is pivotal. But for children, play is also freedom of expression, freedom of movement, and a critical chance to explore self-identity, independence. There are 3 of the articles in that beautiful, colourful list over there that really stand out for me in relation to the work that the department does. And they're those 3 there, 6, 28, 29. And those articles are so important to us because they're a signal for what early childhood education can do for a human being. And I say deliberately for a human being and not for a child, because yes, early childhood education is important for the child, but it's important for that person's whole life. I'll go through that in a little bit now, if you can click on to the next one. There we go. We now know, because our evidence base has really been maturing over the last 20, 30 years or so, that early childhood experience are absolutely vital for shaping positive health, development, learning and wellbeing later in life. We know the criticality of this early childhood development window for determining lifelong outcomes, and the evidence tells us that timing is everything. 90% of brain development is done by the time a child starts school. That first 2,000 days in a child's life sets up the brain architecture that makes the difference to how their lives will turn out. And it includes the social and emotional development and executive function. A person's ability to self-regulate, exercise self-control, be resilient, be able to focus and make good decisions. All of that architecture is what's happening in those first 2,000 days. That's critical for a wide range of generic life skills, obviously, but particularly for the groups of children and the families we're talking about today. It's also a critical foundation for healing and for breaking multi-generational cycles. Research, click on to the next one. Deb mentioned the AEDC. Here's some cute charts to show you the focus of our attention. This research shows that children who start compulsory school education with strong oral language, literacy, and executive functioning are more likely to be confident, involved learners. So the AEDC, it's collected in Australia every 3 years. It's collected usually, in term 2 or term 3 of the prep year. It's done through schools, but really it's measuring what's happened before a child starts school. And this shows some pretty important things for us. Victoria consistently performs better. We care about these things, obviously, because we care about our community. We perform better than other states, and we're often at the top or in the top bracket across these measures. But our results also show a persistent trend that is part of what Deb was referring to before. Approximately 20% of children are starting school developmentally vulnerable on one or more domain, and approximately 10% of children are starting school vulnerable on 2 or more domains. Children who have adverse life experiences of the kinds that Deb was referring to are particularly likely to be developmentally vulnerable. And unfortunately, those children experiencing adverse life experience are also more likely to not access the benefit of early childhood education. And that's what we're about when we talk about these programs that we're doing in partnership with one another. It's also, early childhood is a one-time thing. You don't get to go back. It's really hard to make up that gap once it emerges for a child. So that window of intervention when a child's in their first 2,000 days is really critical. As you are more than aware, I'm sure, vulnerability can happen for all families from all walks of life. And what the AEDC can't really tell us is what sits behind those indicators, the stories that you and your colleagues interact with and see every day. And while the day-to-day work of the early childhood education and child and family sectors may seem fairly different in practice, what's shared between our sectors is this incredibly strong commitment and determination to achieve the best outcomes for children and their families. So we know that in addition to supporting child development, early childhood education and care services are also a sort of baseline protective factor for young children. Those services have connections to allied health, secondary and tertiary services. They're a safe place for children to form attachments with adults, sustained attachments with qualified adults, which is so important for children who are vulnerable. And they also support parents, and especially women, to engage with work and study and increase their financial independence. And all of those reasons means it's a huge priority for us to support the engagement of all children, and especially children who might be experiencing vulnerability, to get into those settings for all of those reasons about the child, but also those reasons about the family around the child. The importance of bringing all of these aspects of service delivery together has been highlighted by government recently in the creation of the portfolio, the children's portfolio, under our relatively recently new minister, Leslie Blanthor. She's been your minister for longer than she's been ours, but it's a very clear signal from government about priority for our sectors working holistically together and targeting what our kind of mainstream services can do for these children and families who are experiencing vulnerability in some way. So I'll just talk about the giant reform program for a moment, and then move on to some of the other aspects that are more specifically for today. The Best Start, Best Life reforms. I love this picture. I love it so much for a range of reasons. These reforms are the most significant change to Victoria's early childhood education system in a generation or more. They are huge. So there's 4 components on the slide. There's free kinder, which supports 2 years of quality early childhood education and is available in sessional kindergarten services, but also as an additional subsidy in long day care services available no matter where you are in the sector. Free Kinder benefited 140,000 children and their families last year. There's 3-year-old kindergarten, which is an increase in the program offering for younger children, enables us to be able to support children with high quality education and qualified staff earlier in their lives. The pre-prep, 4-year-old kinder over time is also gradually transitioning to be pre-prep by a 30-hour-a-week program of play-based learning for 4-year-old children in Victoria. And we're also getting into the business where we're establishing 50 government-owned and operated early learning centres across the state in communities that are experiencing high levels of childcare demand and high levels of socioeconomic disadvantage in those communities who need it most. So for children who have experienced, and you can move on to the next one, for children who have experienced the disrupted engagement with formal learning opportunities, which we know is a reality for families that are experiencing vulnerability and who might be moving or experiencing stresses that make it difficult to always get to learning. This expanded offer from the government is an incredibly important opportunity. It allows for greater continuity of engagement with the child and with the child's family. Australian longitudinal study showed that children in year 3 who have been to kinder were nearly half a year ahead of those who hadn't. Providing a longer program in the year before school in particular gives more time for children of all backgrounds and abilities to deepen their learning and development. It gives children the gift of time with skilled teachers and educators, and with more hours available, teachers and educators can provide deeper and more deliberate and more tailored support to the child and to the child's family and carers too. Our Victorian Child and Family Services sector is an incredibly critical partner in our work to ensure that children's right to learn and develop and play is maintained, preserved and improved. Your work is vital to connecting children and families to connecting their access to those programs I mentioned, make sure that they're actually taking part in what they're entitled to. We've been working with the centre to improve vulnerable children's access, not just for 3 years, but really for quite a long time, but formally with this program for 3 years. And Early Start Bright Future was initiated to try and create this kind of point of contact and connection to maximise what we can do for children and families together. So as part of that Early Start Bright Future program, we have an early years finder, which gives current and accessible information about a wide range of supports available for children in the early years. And it's proven already to be a really effective point of reference for practitioners in the child and family services sector. It includes information about participation supports such as access to early learning, early childhood lookout, flexible support packages, Early Start Kinder. And those programs in particular are the ones that are designed specifically for the children experiencing vulnerability, children known to child protection. They're specifically for those children and their families. So I've mentioned all the big mainstream reforms that we're doing, and these programs are nested within that, and they're specifically for those cohorts. This program also we've also got webinars, online education sessions to support access, not unlike this one, I imagine. There's literature reviews, there's sector consultations that contribute to the evidence base, which is an ever-evolving thing. And we have an incredibly successful monthly newsletter. Now, this always creeps me out because I'm an old person, but we can see the open rates, like who's opening that newsletter and clicking through things, and they're really strong. I find it slightly creepy, but it shows that it's effective. So if you're not already reading it, get onto it, because we can see that people are finding it valuable. Early Start Bright Future and the work generally that we've undertaken with the centre is of such an important enabler in better establishing and strengthening our service connections between our sectors. Your ability as practitioners to access this information enables the critical access for the children who have in our systems who have a right to that early learning and a right to all those opportunities that can set their lives on a different trajectory. So I encourage you to make the most of the Early Start Bright Future program, get familiar with the resources, and I encourage you, to kind of take part really actively in today. I hope you get a lot of reflections out of the panel discussion, and you get practical tools to take back to your teams and work with them on. Thanks for your time, and hope you have an excellent forum today.
Hello, everyone. I've been sitting there thinking, did you know what you were getting when you invited me to speak? Seriously. So I should, it's the fate. Yes, be afraid. I think it's important to give you some warnings about me. So sometimes when I get passionate, a word might slip out that's inappropriate. So I don't know if you can, this is live, isn't it? So you can't edit. I'll do my best. But I also sort of thought about why invite me? Because I can be very provocative too. And I'm going to start already. So this might be the last time you hear me speak here. Here you go. I was curious about the rights of the children because I was wondering if anyone asked the children. Were those rights thought up by adults? Were they thought up by educators? Were they thought up by people, professionals working with the kids? Or did anyone ask the kids, what rights do you want to have? Because kids are amazing. If you ask them questions, they will tell you pretty straight what it is that they want. And I've had that happen again and again in my career when I've asked them questions and they just cut through the shit. They're my first word and my last. Because I was thinking that thing of every child has a right to be alive is really basic. And surely we can aim higher than that. Surely we can aim high to say every child has a right to thrive. That would inspire me more, not just to be alive. I think they have a right to be heard and a right to teach others about what they feel, what they want, and what they need. And then the third one, I felt like it's they've got a right to be respected, full stop. Not that they've got a right to be respected and then respect others. I think if you're brought up and you're respected, you actually will respect others. But I sort of thought that felt like very adult language to me, that some adults have come together and thought this sort of brilliant stuff. And I think, well, kids will tell us if we ask them. Kids will show us if we look. So I'm not meaning to sort of not say that's all good stuff, but I'm saying I think we can do better. But we start by doing better by actually involving children themselves in decisions that impact them. And I think that should I leave now? Scored it out. That thing about having skilled workers. And again, I think that's a very adult sort of bureaucratic word. And I think what they should have is kind, compassionate, responsive, caring workers. Because you can be really skilled, but actually not necessarily a kind person. And I think I have that amazing honour of being able to work with, I still work with infants and children, I still work with families. I get to meet all sorts of cross sections of professionals. And in looking at the early years staff, I think it's a tough gig because often service is not well staffed. They don't have good numbers. And then when you've got a few kids who are tricky, that those kids can take up a lot of time of the staff, and then the staff are feeling like, well, this is, So I think, there's lots of things that we could do, but I do think let's just stay with what children tell us about themselves, and let's think about being kind and gentle and playful with kids, because that stuff's really important. No matter how many degrees you've got, if you're not doing that stuff first and foremost, I'm not sure that any of the other stuff matters. I'm also not really sure exactly what my brief is about, what I'm meant to be talking about. So I'll just, ad lib as I usually do. Just as well your boss was out of the room when I said all the controversial stuff. So now you're back in here. You might
Is this have my coffee?
Yeah, is this being recorded?
I think it is being
Yeah, well, you can-
I get to listen to that now.
You can listen to it. I'll be out the building in a moment. My last visit here. Yeah. So I spoke to, I think it was Michelle. Was Michelle? Yes, about what do I talk about? And you gave me 3 topics, and I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do this, but I guess I've already got myself on the run here. But one of the questions you said was, how do we identify the voice of the children when they're not talking, due to the age of the child or if they withdraw? If we go back to the science stuff, which if we actually think about what has the neuroscience taught us about development, what it's taught us is that we exist first and foremost in our body. And it's our body, the physiological development of who we are, that is the foundation for everything else that follows. So essentially for the infant who does not have language, they have expression through their face. They have expression through the way they hold their body. They have expression through the way they either gaze or do not gaze at the people around them. And they tell us an enormous amount about their world if we're prepared to listen. And we listen with our eyes, and we listen with our head, and we listen with our heart. And for those in the room and those watching this now, if you meet with a little one who's very distressed or very shut down or very hurt or not feeling safe, you feel it. If you're not feeling it, it's because you're not paying attention. So essentially, the infant will give us an enormous amount of information about their world by how they are in the space with us. They will show us an enormous amount by how they interact with their caregiver. They will show us an enormous amount by how they react when their caregiver maybe leaves the room. And in the group work programs I've done, I've seen this happen multiple times where a parent up and leaves the room and leaves their little one sitting in the room because they're going to go to the toilet or do whatever, and they've just gone. And the little one's just like, where is my caregiver? Or they might be, they might get really distressed. So how I guess I came to do this work, because I was pretty scared of babies, haven't had any, so that could be another mark against my name. But how I learned about infants was what they taught me. So I remember after running my first peekaboo group, which is a mother-baby group work program, when I think people sort of thought I knew what I was doing, which I didn't really. And the colleague came from maternity leave, came and sort of said, oh, beat my baby like this, and I'm like right in my face. Like this is my neck, which I can do. And I was like, I go, like this, and then the little one started crying because I invaded that little one's space. And I felt really embarrassed because it's like, oh, I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. How I learnt to know what to do, and I still stuff up, is the little ones teach me. They let me know how close or how far I get. They let me know about whether I can come into their space or not. So what I learned from my early times in running the group, when I was absolutely out of my depth, was that the infants will teach me how far, how close they want me to be or not, if I listen to them. And when I didn't listen to them, then they'd let me know fairly heartily, back off, Bunston. So I think children are very profound teachers. They can teach us an enormous amount about them if we are prepared to listen and if we're prepared to ask them. So talking isn't really necessary because you can learn an immense amount about another person just through observation, just through being in the lift. And there's a big personality in the lift, and you sort of go, "Oh, hello, who's this person?" So I'm not like talking to you in the lift, but I'm making an assessment. I'm judging. I'm sort of, oh, okay, does this person know everyone in the lift or whatever? You know, we all do it, and we do it, and we know this through the science that we feel first, we think second. Language is second, not first. So we're in a profession that privileges language. We're in a profession that privileges sometimes the academia, like getting someone like me in. What a mistake. That thing of like, just because you've got degrees or whatever else, that they're the skilled expert people. I know through my work that some of the people I admire most are those people who don't have multiple degrees, but are bloody good at what they do. And they don't do it for the accolades. They do it because they're passionate about what they're doing. So for me, we can hear the voice of children if we listen for it and if we ask them what they want. Talking, you know, the other topic was how does trauma related to family violence impact the child's capacity to learn? What might these challenges present? Well, the capacity to learn occurs, and if we're talking about learning in the sense of from an educative sort of like learning good things and learning to write and learning to do all those things that progress us in our life, if that's what you mean by learning, trauma does inhibit that sort of stuff. And it inhibits it because what the child is doing is busy trying to survive. So at home, they try to survive so they can shut down. Maybe will not play, or if they do play, the play is traumatic. So we've got a little one at the time in their life where there's the most neural development that's ever going to happen, but they're needing to shut down in order to protect themselves from what's going on around them. Not a good time to shut down at the very beginning of life, but for some kids, that's what they have to do. So when they go into other environments, so whether it's kindergarten, whether it's preschool, whether it's wherever it is, they're going to shut down in that space too, because they're going to have to suss out, are you safe people? And if they have enough continuity of care in those environments, then they will begin to open up. And that environment can be a compensatory experience for what happens at home. They can maybe also tell us some stuff about what's happening at home, not through, again, language, but through behaviour, that something's not okay at home, something doesn't feel safe. And I'm not sure if you've experienced this before, but some of the children I've worked with actually don't want to leave you, which is a pretty big sign of why would a child want to stay with me over wanting to. I am a pretty bloody good auntie, so I know in my family, the thing was I would come and rile up the kids and then I'd go home, which I'm still believing is an important thing to do. But I think it's that experience of, for people that they don't know, I know in our group work program, even assessment sessions where I remember going into a housing commission building, and myself and my colleague were there for about an hour and a half. And when we went to go, the little one was starting to protest because something was different in the room whilst we were there. And probably not just for the little one, but for the mum as well. So, you know, that's sort of, the infancy and early childhood is such a fluid, powerful time. And those who are operating in that space can be incredible in terms of the reparation that they provide for those little ones. So do not ever underestimate how powerful that is. And I think one of the things that is disappointing about our community is that we don't invest a lot of money and resources into those early years. We talk about it, but we don't actually invest a lot of time and money into that space. And it's such a critical time in the development of a child. So if you have got a child who is living with trauma, living with family violence, and it can take quite a while before a parent decides to leave a violent relationship. And for all sorts of complex reasons. I mean, there can be a lot of judgment about people who stay, but there's always a complex story behind it, often intergenerational. So it can take quite some time to leave. And what I do know is in the research that I did, I managed to go to 8 refuges. 3 were overseas, 3 were in remote Australia, and 2 were in Melbourne. I interviewed 10 mums. I did infant observations, which was my research methodology. So I'm trained in infant observation, which I think has radically changed how I work. That was the basis of putting the infant at the beginning of all my data collection. Was the infant obs that came first, and then I analysed what the mums said, and then I analysed what the workers said. But in that process of doing that work, and now I've lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me. But in that space, there was oh yes, that's what I was going to say. That all of the 10 mothers in my research left their violent relationship because of their infant. So they hadn't left because of themselves. Some of them have been in fairly long-term relationships. They left because of their infant. So to me, that points to a space that's incredibly rich, incredibly valuable. It's a motivation for wanting to create a different future for your child that you didn't have before you had your child, which talks to the low self-esteem. And for me, I feel like if we could turn things, the hourglass over and could think about what's going to be the most powerful and effective way to create change, for me, it would be the infant space. Because there's hope in the infant space. And not always, it's often quite complex, but generally speaking, parents want to give their child something that they didn't get. And not always is it about the child. It can be very confused sometimes because it could be this child is this for me. So not necessarily always seeing the infant as their own little subjective person, but sometimes it's about, if I have this child's going to make up for all the crap in my life, which puts a huge responsibility on the child. But it's still a very rich time to get in there and work. And I know I look 35, but I've been doing this work for over 30 years. And I've done a lot of different things in my career. So I've been trained in lots of different modalities. And nothing comes near infant mental health, this opportunity to create change, because there is so much hope there. And the infant tells us lots of stuff when I'm working with them in the room with me. So I can observe things and I can reflect on those things in the space in a way that can stun parents. So I had a session once with, mum was in the baby group, and the father was actually the main carer for the infant. And that was because mum had made threats to harm the baby when she was in hospital. So mum came to the group, and that in itself was very profound because mum actually talked about that she had threatened to harm her baby in the group, which opened up this amazing discussion with the other mothers, which would seldom probably be discussed in a mum's support group about their own anger issues and things like that. So that in itself was really profound. But I invited the father to come in and have a family session, so mum, dad, and the little one, because I felt like, well, he's the main carer. So if we're doing work with mum, I'll do work with dad. Big bloke, big voice, big presence. So that was interesting in itself because I had a different sense of what might be the dynamic in that relationship, because he had a presence about him that I thought you could be very scary. So we had the session, we had mum sitting on the couch, the little one was next to her, and then there was Dad, and then there was me in the space. And they started to talk about, the breakup, those sorts of things. And the little one was, happily engaged in the space. She was making noises. She was looking around, very contented between Mum and Dad. Then Mum started to talk about the fact that she would really like to still be in the relationship with the father. And the father, with his raised voice, was sort of saying, that's not going to happen. And Mum started crying. So what did I see? The little one who'd been playing, happy, Googling, doing all the stuff that Googling, no, that's the wrong word, isn't it? Cooing, happily there between Mum and Dad, was frozen, looking at Mum. And Mum had tears streaming down her face. And I said to both of them, did you see, well, can you see what I see? Did you see what just happened then? And they were both oblivious to what was going on with this little one. And I said, your daughter went from happily, safely playing in the space to freezing. And she froze looking up at you, Mum, because she could feel your distress. So it was there in front of them. I didn't have to do any major brain surgery. It was there in front of them to see. And I said, if this impacts your little daughter this way, what happens when you two are fighting with each other? This dad actually really loved his daughter. This mum really loved her daughter. It hadn't occurred to them that what they do has an immediate impact on their daughter. So whilst this couple didn't get back together, what they did start to do was work out what they needed to do to be a united front and to work together for the sake of their daughter, because they loved their daughter. So infants tell us. They tell us what they want. They tell us what they need. They show us all the time. But us adults aren't very bright. And we're so caught up in our own world, and we're so caught up in all the things that we think need to happen, that the best little teachers that we have are not listened to. So my thing is saying, how about we learn from them? How about we let them teach us what it is that they need? They don't have a degree. They don't have all the qualifications. They're not a skilled worker, but bloody hell, they know what makes them feel safe, and they know what doesn't make them feel safe. And they will show us if we watch, and if we are interested, and if we allow ourselves to be emotionally impacted by their presence. They're going to tell us a lot of stuff, but we just don't really listen. My third, how am I doing, Michelle? G'day. My third point was the importance of connection to community. So I have the great honour, and I'm a big fan of maternal child health nurses. I think they do an amazing job, and I do a lot of work with the maternal universal nurses and with enhanced. And what I consistently see is they get into places that other people can't get to. So they get to go into the family home, and I think it's because it's like, maybe people think you have to let them in. I don't know what it is, but they get into places, which is just amazing. And because they get into those places, they're able to facilitate sometimes building trust between those families with outside support services that may not have happened otherwise. And I've been privileged enough to do a few family sessions with maternal child health nurses where I go in and do a family consult. So those guys are really important to children. The early years services, supported play groups, all of those sort of opportunities to bring families together in a way that isn't like under the microscope, but that is actually inviting them into a space where they can feel supported, that they're inviting the children into a space where they can play, and maybe for the first time actually inviting the parents into play, which might not have been something they've done as children, is incredibly powerful. But I think as a sector, it's not given the same kudos as other sectors are given. I worked at a mental health service somewhere in Melbourne. And I think, there can be this elitism, depending on where you work, is like you're, whatever. And there are some brilliant people in that service, without a doubt. But there are brilliant people who don't work in those services, that work in the community, that, like I said, do supported playgroups, that work in kinder, whatever, that are outstanding and make a difference in the lives of children every day. Probably won't be the heroes, probably won't get an Order of Australia or the money, probably don't get an Order of Australia medal, but they do amazing work with little ones, and they provide a place that's safe for these kids to come to. So there's a chance, there's some reparation that can go on, because that safe place compensates for the other space that maybe isn't always safe. If they had more staff, if it was better resourced, they probably also might have time to do more of bringing the families into that space, because they probably could, in a way that other services couldn't, at a time when parents are probably more likely to be amenable to coming into that space. So if I was to sort of say what my blueprint is, it would be to fund this service, this sector better. It would be to respect it more, because until we respect infants and children, we're not going to respect the workers that work with them. Bit like I think is happening in schools a little bit at the moment, where teachers are not really respected anymore. And maybe in some instances that was fair, but in a lot of instances it was not fair. So it's like we're not investing in our children. We're not investing in our children because that's not where the money's made. But we're dumb in not doing so. We're really, really dumb. Because if we can get that beginning right or better, then what comes next is going to be better. And I remember hearing, I don't know, I'm a bit of a fan of Radio National at the moment, which means I'm up myself because I listen to ABC. You care? I don't care.
You're 60.
Look, it's really, it's like you can learn all this stuff while you're driving and you don't have to read a book or do anything. Because they tell you it all. And it's like, oh yeah, that's really cool. But I remember, I think there's something in, like, I don't know if it's US or somewhere, where they're pushing to get 16-year-olds to be able to vote. And they were sort of saying, 16-year-olds these days are pretty switched on. So if they got a vote, imagine how that would change the political landscape, because they're not going to put up with people who won't look at climate change. They're not going to put up with the bullshit that goes on around where we put our money. 16-year-olds are going to say, no, we want this, this and this. And, you could say, oh, what would they know? But, the wisdom of youth, sometimes they actually, and look at these kids who've been out there protesting and doing marches and whatever, and they're saying, you stupid adults, you wreck our world, stop it. Same things for kids. Kids can tell us what they need. And we had a group, we've got a program called Parkers, which is now called Parkers Plus, and that was for primary school kids. And we interviewed these kids when there was I think it wasn't the Royal Commission, but it was around the time where there was some expert group coming around and saying what to do. And we interviewed these kids because we wanted to have their voice heard. So we videotaped it and we asked these kids, so what do you think adults need to do to keep kids safe? And these were kids that were, the ages for the group were 8 to 12. And one of the boys said, I think the people who use violence need to go back to school, the school where you learn not to be violent. And we said, well, how long do you think they need to be at that school? And he said, until they stop being violent. I thought that's pretty good, because there is, behaviour change programs that, have limited time. There's like, the proof is in the pudding. Once you stop being violent, you can graduate. Then we said to one of the girls said, what do you think people need to have to change there being violence in the world, and she said they need to have kindness in their heart. And I thought, I couldn't have put it better. So, from my experience, and I'm going to be on time, so you all get to, all right? I've never been invited back into this building. But yeah, my message is children have a lot to tell us if only we ask them. So let's start asking them, and let's start looking after the service providers that take care of children, because at the moment we're not. So what we're basically doing is saying as a community that infants, children, and young people are really not worth the money. And that's a big mistake, because that actually impacts all of us. And I think if they're respected, we don't need to tell them that you have to learn to respect others. If they're respected, they will know inherently how to respect others. So that's my gig. Thank you. I will